To the index now, new images from the wreck of the Titanic show changes to the famous ship. A 15-foot section of the portside railing has fallen to the ocean floor. Scientists say it is a reminder that the Titanic is deteriorating.
The Titanic is not resting peacefully on the ocean floor.
Despite the violence of the sinking and all that time on the bottom, what's inside that bow in particular is still a ghostly sense of the ship that was.
Nearly 12,500 feet beneath the North Atlantic, the wreck is collapsing, rotting, and being consumed by the sea.
It's incredibly challenging to work at Titanic. It's dangerous. It's a very dangerous place.
The ship lies torn in half, its interior exposed to crushing pressure and total darkness. Deep inside are hidden decks few humans have ever entered, sealed off and quietly decaying. You're about to see what has been hidden there for more than 112 years. The cold, haunting interior. The remotely operated vehicle entered the wreck through a torn opening along the ship's side. As it passed inside, the lights revealed corridors that had not been seen since 1912. Rust covered every surface. The floors were buried under thick silt that had settled undisturbed for more than a century. Electrical wires hung from the ceilings where they had snapped during the sinking, untouched by human presence ever since. There were no sounds inside the ship except the steady hum of the vehicle. At this depth, the pressure pressed down relentlessly on metal that had already begun to fail. The temperature remained locked at 4 degrees Celsius, the same cold that filled the ship on the night it sank. Nothing down there changed. Time did not move forward. It only wore things away. As the vehicle continued deeper, the damage became worse. Doorways had collapsed, walls had weakened. Areas that once held passengers now crumbled at the slightest disturbance. The pilot had to move slowly, knowing that a single wrong motion could collapse a surface or fill the space with blinding silt. What coated the ship was not just rust. The metal was being eaten by living bacteria that fed on iron and slowly destroyed the structure from the inside. Over the decades, these growths multiplied, adding weight and speeding the collapse of entire sections of the wreck. The most unsettling part was the silence. These spaces had once been filled with voices, machinery, and music. Now nothing remained but darkness and decay. The Titanic was no longer simply deteriorating, it was disappearing, and it was only a matter of time before even these hidden interiors were gone forever. First-class and second-class sections. Forward of the breakpoint, where the bow section buried itself 60 feet into sediment, lie the remnants of state-of-the-art palaces. First-class staterooms once showcased luxury that defined that era. Room B-58 featured Louis C's styling, gilded furniture, plush carpets thick enough to silence footsteps, marble-topped wash basins with running water. Room C-56 displayed Louis XIV's grandeur. There were 96 single-berth rooms on A and B decks alone, each designed in period styles ranging from Queen Anne to Italian Renaissance. Today, those walls barely exist. Because the cabins were framed in pine and teak, which are woods chosen for elegance, not really endurance, the structures have collapsed into themselves. What remains is a warren of tangled electrical wiring suspended in darkness, brass bed frames jutting from silt like broken bones, marble washstands sitting in places where rooms once stood, doorknobs attached to doors that lead nowhere. But here's the crazy irony. The very features that made first-class luxurious kind of its destruction. Softwoods decay rapidly at such depth. Only hardwoods like mahogany and teak survive in recognizable form. The lavatories remain visible because they were framed in steel, but the drawing rooms have vanished. James Cameron's 2003 Ghosts of the Abyss expedition journeyed into specific staterooms. They captured the gilded Louis Quinze fireplace in Bruce Ismay's sitting room. Ismay, the White Star Line managing director who survived while 1500 did not. The marble Adam-style fireplace in Mrs. Cardeza's cabin still stands, though, a ghost of elegance amid catastrophe. Cut glass window screens from the first-class dining room lie scattered in the debris field. their purpose erased by time. The reception room on D-deck survives in partial form. So does the first-class dining room. These are probably the only intact public spaces left in the entire wreck. But venture into second-class territory and you find nothing. The section where second-class accommodations resided didn't descend gracefully like the bow. It corkscrewed, imploded, and collapsed into itself during a violent plunge to the seabed. Second-class passengers enjoyed cabins that rivaled first-class on other ships. Oak paneling painted glossy white, mahogany furniture, and all that. All of it compacted into unrecognizable wreckage. What remains are fragments in the debris field, pieces of a library, sections of the smoking room's steel housing and oak panels. The second-class grand staircase exists only in photographs now. The elevator shaft is barely a twisted column of metal, barely distinguishable from the surrounding chaos. But if the passenger areas tell stories of elegance lost, the machinery below tells a different tale entirely. Boiler rooms and engine machinery. The vehicle descended deeper into the wreck and entered the heart of the ship. This was the engine room, the place where Titanic's power was produced. Two massive reciprocating engines rose 3 stories high, their steel cylinders fixed in place and towering over the surrounding wreckage. Each engine had once driven one of the ship's wing propellers, while a central turbine powered the middle propeller. Together, these machines generated more than 50,000 horsepower and forced nearly 900 feet of steel through the North Atlantic at full speed. In 1912, they were among the most powerful engines ever placed aboard a ship. They were built to run without pause and to endure enormous stress. When the Titanic sank, the ship broke apart with violent force, tearing decks and bulkheads away. Much of the surrounding machinery was destroyed, crushed, or scattered across the seabed. The main engines, however, remained standing exactly where they had been operating when power was finally lost. Rust and thick biological growth covered their surfaces, clinging to every edge and joint, slowly consuming the metal while leaving the structures standing like empty shells. Beyond the engines were the boiler rooms, and the destruction there was far worse. Titanic carried 29 boilers arranged across 6 boiler rooms. Hundreds of men worked in these spaces, shoveling coal by hand for hours at a time to keep the furnaces burning. The air was thick with heat, smoke, and dust. Temperatures often approached 50 degrees Celsius, and exhaustion was constant. When the iceberg struck, boiler room number 6 was among the first to flood. Freezing seawater burst into spaces filled with superheated metal. Steam flashed violently through the room. Men were burned alive in seconds. Others were knocked off their feet, crushed by collapsing equipment, or trapped as the water rose faster than they could escape. There was no warning and no time. Many never made it out of the boiler rooms at all. As the ship broke apart, entire boilers were torn from their foundations and thrown into the open sea. Several landed in the debris field, where they remained more than a century later. Their thick cast-iron construction allowed them to resist the corrosion that destroyed much of the ship, but their immense weight ensured they would never be recovered. They lay scattered between the bow and stern sections, silent and immovable. One of these boilers marked the moment the wreck was finally discovered in 1985. Its unmistakable shape appeared on sonar, ending 73 years of failed searches. Inside these spaces, the silence felt heavy. Pressure gauges still hung on bulkheads, open grates where stokers once climbed down into the boiler room's framed empty openings. The machinery endured. The men who worked it were erased violently and without mercy. And deeper inside the wreck, the signs of destruction only grew more disturbing. Third-class and forgotten corridors. In the bow section lie corridors that most expeditions never enter, the third-class territories. These narrow passageways were home to over 1,000 passengers. Immigrants chasing the American dream, families traveling with children, single men housed in the bow while women and families occupied the stern. They paid £7 for tickets, roughly £900 in today's currency, which included meals, a luxury on most ships at the time. The accommodations reflected this unusual quality. Each cabin had plumbed-in wash basins with running water, electric lights, and heat. For passengers who were only used to squalor in steerage, this was paradise. But only 2 bathtubs served all 710 third-class passengers. ROV exploration of these areas reveals something really disturbing. The corridors have become labyrinths. Doorways seal themselves with sediment. Walls that once separated cabins have collapsed, creating open spaces that would stun even experienced pilots. A 1991 expedition by the Nautil submersible ventured into third-class bow sections and found rusticle-covered floors, bulkheads barely distinguishable from shadows, and a collapsed sink basin with a light fixture still attached. The mail sorting room has also been explored. Mail bags sit covered in pink, hairy fungus. The gate to cargo areas remains locked, a barrier that serves no purpose anymore. What makes these spaces haunting isn't their appearance, it's their history. During the sinking, third-class passengers faced confusing mazes with no direct access to lifeboats. Stewards positioned throughout tried to guide them upward, but many passengers didn't speak English and couldn't read navigation signs. Some discovered emergency doors into second-class areas. Others found iron ladders leading 5 or 6 decks up to the boat deck. Passenger Olaus Abelseth described the chaos, climbing ladders while helping his sister navigate iron rungs in darkness, water rising behind them. Patrick Canavan discovered an emergency door while exploring the ship on previous days, and that saved multiple lives when he led fellow countrymen through it. Daniel Buckley witnessed a steward throwing a steerage passenger back downstairs, only for that passenger to break through moments later as panic overrode protocols. In the end, only 25% of third-class passengers survived. Of that 25%, a fraction were men. The corridors inside the wreck don't reveal locked gates as most people think. They revealed nothing but a complex labyrinth. The third-class accommodations were better than most ships, but they were buried deepest in the hull, farthest from salvation. The corridors themselves have become tombs of choices that couldn't be made and paths that couldn't be found. But if third-class corridors speak of confusion, the lifeboat deck tells an entirely different, sad story. Lifeboat decks and implosion damage. The boat deck was the last part of the Titanic to go under. At approximately 2:05 a.m., just 15 minutes before the ship vanished completely, this deck slipped beneath the surface of the North Atlantic. It was the final place where people stood, waited, and hoped. Today, almost nothing of it remained intact. Along both sides of the deck once stood lifeboat davits, heavy mechanical arms built by the Wayland Davit and Engineering Company. These davits were designed to lower lifeboats safely into the water. The system was advanced enough to handle 64 lifeboats. Titanic carried only 20. Those 20 boats could hold 1,178 people. There were 2,208 people on board. That shortage decided who lived and who died. During the ship's breakup and violent fall to the sea floor, most of the davits were torn from the deck. They were ripped away like loose tools and scattered across the debris field. A few, however, remained standing. One davit on the bow stayed upright, frozen in position, as if still waiting to lower lifeboat number 1. That boat carried only 12 people, despite having room for 40. Nearby, another davit remained locked in its launching position where collapsible A had once been attached, preserved at the exact moment before waves tore the boat away. During recovery expeditions, RMS Titanic Incorporated brought one davit arm and its base to the surface. The artifact revealed a chilling detail. One side of the mechanism showed the arm lowered, the other side remained raised. One lifeboat was launched, the other never was. The difference between those two positions represented dozens of lives that were never saved. In 2024, the first expedition to the wreck since 2010 revealed another devastating loss. The famous bow railing, a 15-foot section on the port side that appeared in countless photographs and films, had collapsed completely. Imaging confirmed it fell as one piece and now rested on the seabed below. This was damage that could not be undone or documented again. The ship was falling apart faster than expected. Bacteria continued to eat away at the iron. Ocean currents pushed against weakened metal day after day. Deep-sea storms shifted heavy structures. Human submersibles landing repeatedly on the wreck also contributed to collapse in certain areas. The upper decks were already failing. The forward mast lost its crow's nest decades ago, snapping off and disappearing into the darkness. The gymnasium roof collapsed. Captain Smith's quarters were torn open when an outer wall gave way. His bathtub remained visible for now. What remained on the boat deck were gaps, empty davits, missing railings, broken spaces where people once stood waiting for rescue. The bow showed severe decay, but the stern told an even darker story, one that revealed just how violent the ship's final moments truly were. The broken stern. 2,000 feet south of the bow lies wreckage that barely resembles a ship, the stern. Unlike the bow, which descended relatively intact and buried itself nose first into sediment, the stern experienced catastrophic violence. It rose nearly vertical before breaking away from the forward section, then corkscrewed toward the ocean floor in a spiraling descent. The stern had not fully flooded when it separated, which meant air remained trapped inside as it plunged. At increasing depths, water pressure crushed that trapped air in violent implosions. Decks pancaked onto one another. The hull buckled and twisted like crumpled paper. By the time the stern hit bottom, it had transformed from a structured vessel into a chaotic tangle of steel, barely 350 feet long but spread across a much wider area. This is where second-class accommodations once stood. The library, the smoking room, the enclosed promenade, all of it compacted into wreckage so severe that identifying specific structures requires extremely detailed analysis. The steel housing for the second-class stairway can be identified if you know just what to look for, along with the promenade windows still enclosed in their frames. 5 boilers from the aft boiler rooms remain in their beds, intact despite the surrounding destruction. They sit amid ruptured bulkheads and twisted support beams, monuments to engineering surrounded by chaos. The third-class general room was examined during a 1991 US-Canadian-Russian expedition. Amid the destruction, which saw bulkheads torn open and beams bent at impossible angles, the black and white floor tiles remained crystal clear. The debris field between bow and stern is known as the breakup area. It spans approximately 3 square miles and contains thousands of objects that spilled from the ship's interior as she tore apart. Boilers scattered like fallen dominoes, pieces of hull plating measuring dozens of feet across, coal from the bunkers spread across the seabed in dark patches called coal fields, kitchen equipment from the galleys in Hell's Kitchen, pots, pans, broken china. A 60-foot chunk of the ship's side is labeled deck house debris. Personal belongings lie everywhere: shoes, clothing, suitcases. A statue of Diana of Versailles, the centerpiece from the first-class lounge, was rediscovered in 2024 after being photographed once in 1986 and lost again for 38 years. 2 feet tall, bronze, lying fully intact in sediment. The stern section continues deteriorating faster than the bow. Some experts predict recognizable sections may collapse entirely within 30 years. Others believe portions have already collapsed between expeditions. The stern is currently on the edge of disappearing completely, eaten away by the ocean and never to be seen again. What remains of the stern isn't a ship, but a warning, a demonstration of what happens when what we thought was indestructible meets the unpredictable forces of nature. The stern shows us not what Titanic was, but what everything eventually becomes. Nothing but a forgotten history. Yet even this destruction still has a lot to teach us after 112 years. Why it still matters. Every expedition to the Titanic reveals the same paradox. The more we learn, the less time we have to learn it. In 1985, scientists believed conditions at 12,500 feet would preserve the ship virtually intact. The extreme cold, crushing pressure and supposed absence of life would act as a deep freeze. But they were completely wrong. The wreck has deteriorated more in 40 years than anyone predicted. Bacterial communities are consuming iron faster than models suggested. Structural collapses are accelerating. The iconic bow railing fell sometime between 2022 scans and the 2024 expedition. In just 2 years. Current estimates suggest major sections could collapse within the next 30 years. Some areas may not last a decade. But here's why the race to document the Titanic matters beyond just maritime history. It's teaching us about deep-sea biology, microbial ecosystems that exist in environments once thought sterile. Halomonas titanicae bacteria are now being studied for waste management applications. Their ability to rapidly decompose metal could help eliminate maritime litter from ocean floors. The wreck is also revealing secrets about the sinking itself. Three-dimensional scans completed in 2022 and 2023 captured the site in unprecedented detail, allowing forensic analysis that could have been impossible with video alone. These digital reconstructions show exactly how the ship broke apart, where hull failure began, and how different sections fell. Future expeditions will explore areas never accessed. The Marconi wireless room, where operators sent distress signals until minutes before the end, remains largely intact according to 2024 assessments. The reciprocating engines deep in the bow could reveal engineering details that were lost when the ship sank. But there's a darker truth. Each expedition might be the last to see certain sections. Each photograph might capture something that collapses before cameras return. The Titanic isn't just deteriorating, it's slowly disappearing. And when it finally becomes a rust stain on the Atlantic seafloor, all we'll have left are the records we create now. The clock is ticking, the legendary ship is dying. And inside those hidden decks, in corridors where people died in 1912, the shadows are now growing deeper. 12,500 feet below the surface, the Titanic whispers its final secrets. Each rusticle that forms, each railing that falls off, each corridor that collapses is the ocean reclaiming what humanity borrowed for one maiden voyage. The hidden decks probably hold the truth we've been avoiding. Nothing lasts forever, not even tragedy. We came searching for a ship, and what we found was history slowly fading away before our very eyes. The question was never what remains after 112 years underwater. The question was always, how long do we have left to remember what was lost? Time's running out. The deep is calling the Titanic home, and soon even the ghosts we now see will be gone, forever.